You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of April 29th, 2025. A lot has happened today, so let's get started. Before we begin, I'd like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support its growth. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now let's move to the front lines. There's a lot of news to cover, and first we'll start with the Sunumi sector of the front. If you look at the map, you'll immediately notice adjustments along the line, particularly near the settlement of Bohhati. This is a location currently under intense assault by the Russian Federation from the north. Based on geolocation data from the past 24 hours, Russian units have significantly expanded their zone of control and advanced, at least in the northern part, managing to consolidate their positions. It's possible that fighting is now ongoing for the western part of the settlement. Today, the Ukrainian side published footage from the 67th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces showing Russian assault troops moving through the village. The video is quite lengthy, with two geolocated segments in the northern area along the Snagost River. Using this footage and other objective evidence, we've adjusted the map. Overall, we can see that around April 24th to 25th, the Russian army launched a large-scale offensive aimed at approaching Evacuation from the north, northwest, and possibly even the west. The goal appears to be cutting off or physically securing control over the H32 Highway, which could eventually lead to the collapse of Ukrainian defenses between Evacuation and the state border. By the end of April 26th, this was the situation on the map. By the end of April 27th, reports confirmed Russian units had consolidated positions in the northern part of Lochnia. These images were published by the Ukrainian side at the time, showing strikes against Russian assault troops using drones. On April 28th, there were reports of an expanded zone of control between Lochnia and Bohhati, with several Russian ATVs moving along tree lines, likely returning to base. Now, as of April 29th, there is confirmed information about the presence of Russian army units within Bohhati. This indicates a broad front offensive targeting Basovka, Veselovka, Zhuravka to the south, as well as Bohhati, Yablunovka, Yunakievka, and Lochnia. These settlements are currently key objectives for the Russian armed forces. There are also reports that the Ukrainian 67th Brigade, responsible for defending Bohhati, has suffered critical losses. Some pro-Russian sources suggest the brigade may soon be withdrawn for reinforcement. Moving on, let's turn to the settlement of Gornyal. Today, some neutral cartographers have noted an expansion of the Russian-controlled zone around Gornyal, with Russian units reaching the state border in some areas. There are still some tree lines under Ukrainian control, but Russian forces are gradually advancing toward these sections of the front. Next, we shift to the Belgorod direction. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has fully cleared the settlement of Demidovka, as confirmed even by pro-Ukrainian mapping services. Pro-Russian sources report that Russian forces have also secured the forest belt along the state border. However, there is some objective footage that may confirm the presence of Russian units in this area. In these clips, we see two Russian assault troops crossing a road from the forest near Demidovka toward another wooded area near the border. Their movement suggests this part of the forest is already under Russian control. One thing is clear, fighting is currently taking place for this section of woodland near the Udava River. Now, let's move to the Kupiansk direction. We'll start from the northern part, where the most significant updates have emerged over the past 24 hours. First, the settlement of Kamyanka. Yesterday, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the complete clearing of this village, and footage was published showing Russian soldiers securing buildings one by one. Based on these images and official reports, we updated the map. However, we noticed yesterday that most of the footage came from the southern and eastern parts, none from the north, making it difficult to confirm whether the northern sector was fully secured. Still, based on the MOD's report, we marked it as such. Today, additional footage was released, perhaps in response to our yesterday's analysis, showing an extended version of the battle for Kamyanka by the 6th Combined Arms Army. In this expanded footage, we see Russian soldiers raising a flag on the northernmost building in the village. The geolocation is precise, clearly showing a Russian soldier waving the flag. With this, we don't need further adjustments. We now have 100% confirmation that Kamyanka is fully under Russian control, as geolocated data covers all sectors. Meanwhile, some neutral cartographers note further advances beyond Kamyanka and the creation of a buffer zone. This is how the map looked as of yesterday, by the end of April 28th. Today there are additional adjustments around Kamyanka. That is, the Russian army is gradually advancing further towards settlements like Dvorochenskaya and Kolodesnaya. Next, we move to the Kupiansk direction itself. Today, there is very important news. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the West troop grouping of the Russian armed forces has fully taken control of the settlement of Doroshevka, a small village. Based on this report, we updated the map, but we're certain the adjustments aren't entirely accurate. The thing is, an offensive in such a protruding area seems unlikely. If the Russian army did manage to clear Doroshevka, then the actual zone of control probably looks something like this, meaning everything inside this red line is likely already under Russian control. The report about Doroshevka was quite unexpected. There had been some past mentions of fighting in this area, but no verifiable geolocation data. Look at how the map looked just yesterday. There were only distant reports from Doroshevka. But today, we're updating it based on the MOD's briefing. It appears the advance was actually broader and more coordinated. There are already early signs that fighting has begun near Monochanovka, located west of Zapadnoye. We can see the Russian army gradually expanding its control zone on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol River. More and more settlements are falling under Russian control, indicating an increasingly dire situation for Ukrainian forces in this sector. Ukrainian units are under round-the-clock surveillance and bombardment, with new objective footage showing FAB strikes on temporary Ukrainian deployment points in the northeastern part of the settlement. Lyman Sector slowed advances and reinforcements. Next, we move to the Lyman Sector. No major adjustments here, but there's been increased Russian drone activity. The 20th Combined Arms Army continues its offensive, but over the past week, the pace has slowed significantly. This is likely because Ukraine managed to deploy additional reserves and resources, stabilizing the front line, at least for now. In the northern sector, Russian forces are slowly pushing Ukrainian defensive lines towards Sherbinovka. Yesterday, Russian troops gained a foothold in the eastern part of Grigorovka, and today, objective footage shows artillery strikes south of Grigorovka, possibly clearing paths for a future advance towards Sherbinovka's southeastern outskirts. The most active front, Konstantinovka direction. Now we move to the most intense sector, as usual in recent days, the Konstantinovka direction, where dozens of geolocated videos and updates pour in daily. The offensive here is broad front, and we'll start with Chassive Ya, where mounting evidence suggests Ukraine's defense has either collapsed or is on the verge of collapse. This is being reported by dozens of pro-Russian and independent sources, including those with direct frontline connections. As for the central part, Russian forces have cleared up to the area marked on the map. We haven't adjusted it yet. However, according to pro-Russian sources, about 60% of the yellow-marked central zone is already under Russian control. A significant portion of central Chassive Ya has fallen. Additionally, a few days ago, reports emerged of a Ukrainian defense breach near the Shevchenko district. Over the past 2 days, more confirmed reports indicate that Russian forces broke through Ukrainian lines near Stupotchki, not just attacking, but securing positions and repelling all Ukrainian counterattacks. This is now being circulated by reliable sources. The push into Stupotchki is confirmed, only geolocation is pending. If Russia takes this settlement, it would be the last village before Konstantinovka itself. There are no more defensive lines left, meaning the front here is either collapsing, has already collapsed, or will collapse imminently, at least on the Chassive Ya flank. Toretsk flank, fighting along the Siversky. Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Further south on the Toretsk flank, fighting continues along the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. The Russian army appears to be planning an expansion of control and possibly a canal crossing. Heavy battles are ongoing, but reliable pro-Russian sources confirm the situation has significantly improved near Zaparigia. There is still no clear understanding of how exactly the map should be updated based on the advances of Russian units. However, one thing is certain, What you see before your eyes no longer reflects the actual situation. The Russian bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of the canal is now significantly wider and deeper. Next, we move toward the direction of the settlement of Klebanbek. For now, the Russian army has paused here. Active operations are underway in the settlement of Sherbinovka. FAB bombs are being used, artillery is working, and round-the-clock efforts are ongoing to detect and destroy temporary deployment points of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine managed to reinforce this pocket with a significant number of units to stabilize the situation, at the cost of losing the first line of defense in areas such as Alexandropol, Valentinovka, Kalinov, and Tarasovka. Currently, the pace of the offensive has slowed down because a critical mass of troops has already been concentrated here. But now, replacing ground assaults, artillery and aviation, drones have taken over, gradually clearing this pocket and its strongholds. We are seeing dozens of geolocated visuals collected over the past 24 hours, and it seems that in the coming days, this will be the main focus of Russian forces, clearing this pocket using drones and establishing full artillery control over the bottleneck of the encirclement in the area of Yablunovka and Oleksandr Kalinov along the H32 Highway. At the same time, combat operations are winding down on the western flank of this pocket, as well as on the eastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This is clearly a junction between directions, and it is at this junction where fierce, bloody, and intense battles are taking place. This is understandable, and we will now go over this in more detail. Let's start with the fact that as early as yesterday, we noted the advance of Russian units near Berezovka, and there are geolocations confirming that Russian soldiers have entrenched themselves in this sector of the front. Furthermore, Russian troops are now on the verge of storming a stronghold located along the H32 Highway. Today, the first objective control footage appeared, confirming the presence of Russian soldiers at this stronghold. Based on this footage, this location has been marked as under Russian control. Some neutral and pro-Russian cartographers have also marked continued Russian advances toward the settlement of Novopoltavka. In fact, this bridgehead, this section of the H32 Highway between the settlements of Malinivka, Novopoltavka, and Nova Alanivka, is key. This is because there are several important lakes here that essentially serve as reservoirs. Reservoirs in the areas of Malinivka, Novopoltavka, and Nova Alanivka form a naturally convenient defensive line. If Russian units manage to take control of approximately this segment of the front, along the reservoirs and small lakes, Ukraine's chances of launching a successful counterattack will be close to zero. At the same time, this salient between the lakes serves as a favorable natural barrier, a defensive line for the Russian armed forces in case of a large-scale offensive toward the pocket. At least the western flank would be completely covered. No one would be able to mount a serious counterattack from that side to stop a Russian advance from the southwest toward the settlement of Zaria. So clearly, there's a strategic intention by the Russian army to seize this bridgehead. Moving further may be difficult, as this position is good for defense, but any further advance would require maneuvering around these water obstacles and constantly facing Ukrainian resistance entrenched on the opposite banks. So we are now witnessing a very important battle for strategic control over a broad segment of the H32 Highway. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk-Dnipro direction. Today, the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian authorities, announced a mandatory evacuation for the following settlements: Novopodhorodny, Raypol, Sukharevo Balka, and Majova. So now we're seeing that Ukrainian authorities are attempting to evacuate a large area. And a few conclusions can be drawn here. Either Ukraine needs space to accommodate military personnel and is therefore evacuating civilians, or they are anticipating a breakthrough in this direction and are trying to move civilians out of harm's way. Judging by what's happening on the ground today, the latter seems more likely. The Russian army continues advancing toward Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Today, pro-Ukrainian cartographers confirmed that the settlement of Uspanka has been fully cleared by Russian forces. They also marked further Russian advances and an expansion of control around Kotlyarivka. Let me remind you that in recent days there have been major offensive operations along the Novo-Yelizavetivka-Nadiyivka axis toward Oleksandrivka. So if we sum up all the events that have taken place over the past, let's say, 7 days, The Russian army has been advancing toward Uspanivka and further toward Novolexandrivka. Additionally, from Novo-Yelizavetivka and Nadiyivka, Russian forces attempted to advance across the fields toward Novolexandrivka and Novoserhiyivka. The Russian army is also consistently expanding its zone of control around the Kotlyarivka area. In other words, we are witnessing a real offensive by the armed forces of the Russian Federation along the line of Muravka, Novo, Mykolaiivka, Novoserhiyivka, Novo-Alexandrivka. These are settlements located right on the border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, and it is precisely in this direction that the Russian army is now moving. Beyond this border lies the area that Ukrainian authorities have declared a mandatory evacuation zone. Next, we move to the Bohhati sector of the front, where intense fighting continues for the southeastern part of the village of Bohhati. The Russian army has once again concluded that artillery and airstrikes are necessary on Bohhati. The town, or rather what's left of the village, remains under constant fire control. The Russian army is striking with every available caliber in its arsenal and is gradually advancing through the fields. Today, geolocations and footage from objective control were published, showing the movement of Russian assault troops in the areas of Konstantinopel, Rozliv, and also Otradna. Based on this footage, we updated the maps accordingly. So based on the published material, the Russian army has significantly expanded its zone of control. However, today we marked primarily contested territory, areas that had already been previously reported by various cartographers as being under Russian control. What's new and worth noting is the Russian army's advance along the T-0518 road from the direction of Rozdolna toward Bohhati. Gradually, day by day, perhaps by tens or even hundreds of meters, Russian forces are closing in on the village of Bohhati. In the near future, fighting will almost certainly spread into the southeastern part, after which the entire village will likely be cleared. Once that happens, Ukrainian troops will likely find it difficult to maintain their defense in Alexeyevka, and the soldiers and command will probably decide to retreat. This would also lead to a collapse of the front line and further accelerated advances toward the border between Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. In other words, we can expect a breakthrough to the regional border along a wide front, starting from the settlement of Dnipro and stretching north toward Novolexandrivka. The Russian army could soon cross into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast across a broad front. As for the Zaparigia sector of the front, today there were no confirmed reports that the Russian army managed to cross the river. It's possible that a Russian special reconnaissance group was operating on the Ukrainian-controlled side of the Dnipro River. Perhaps one of these groups was detected, which led to an exchange of gunfire. This skirmish may have been interpreted by some sources as an attempt to cross the river and establish a bridgehead. In any case, there's no news from this front. The line remains stable for now. And that's all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoyed the video.